Sport and drugs. Too late to change? Contents. In this presentation, I will discuss the past, present, and future of drugs and their existence in the sporting world, including how they are used, some famous examples, and most importantly, how these examples have been handled and what can be done. While recreational use of drugs by athletes is likely and commonplace in some countries and sports, performance enhancing poses an unprecedented risk of loss of integrity of the sporting world. Doping is generally referring to PEDs, meaning performance enhancing drugs, and these can be split into four categories. Anabolic steroids, which are used to give a player better muscle fat ratio and, more importantly, aid recovery time in between games and even injuries. Masking agents are used to hide other potential evidence of doping and are banned consequentially. Stimulants improve many things such as concentration and lung capacity and have varied effects on the player using them. And the most recently developed steroid, blood boosters, allow more hemoglobin in the blood, meaning oxygen gets around the cells faster and in more quantities, resulting in a huge boost of energy to the athlete. Footballers have absolutely nothing to gain by taking drugs, because in contrast to other sports, they need a vast array of qualities and skills to succeed in the game. Now, this is a quote from former and now disgraced FIFA president Sepp Blatter, and while this paints football in an incorrectly innocent light with regards to doping, it does highlight why other sports have much more obvious problems. To be a great cyclist, you only really need one thing, and that's endurance. This has left the sport vulnerable to a plethora of doping controversies throughout its history. Firstly, in July of 1967, British cyclist Tom Simpson died during the Tour de France after suffering a heart attack due to the extreme weather, dehydration, and what were later found out to be PEDs in his system. However, doping was relatively new at this point in history, so his death was mainly whittled down to a personal mistake. In 1988, however, doping was in the zeitgeist after a number of controversies, and this culminated in the entire Festijn cycling team being found doping in the year's Tour de France. This story unravelled further than anything previous had. After a drug search while the team was crossing from France to Switzerland, a large amount of anabolic steroids were found, and later the manager and team doctor admitted to drugging their cyclists to gain a competitive advantage. All involved were met with permanent bans to the sport. And finally, the most famous example, Lance Armstrong. After his former teammate was caught in his own scandal, he testified that Lance had also been using PEDs, a statement which Armstrong didn't contest, and consequently he was stripped of a staggering and unprecedented 7 Tour de France titles. As you can see, with all these controversies, cycling is perhaps the sport that is the most affected by the drug epidemic. However, doping is not just limited to one sport. Ben Johnson was an extremely famous Canadian athlete, and in 1988 at the Olympic Games held in South Korea, he won an impressive gold medal for Canada whilst simultaneously beating out his rival Carl Lewis and setting a new world record for the 100-meter sprint. However, days after receiving his medal, the athlete tested positive for the steroid stanozol. He then returned his gold medals to the Olympic Committee, and his career was never the same afterwards. Diego Maradona is lauded by many to be the greatest football player that ever lived, yet not many remember that in 1994, whilst at the World Cup with Argentina, he tested positive for various ephedrines and other anabolic steroids. Following this, he was tossed out of the squad to ensure there would be no disqualifications in the competition, yet this decision was met with huge backlash from the Argentinian public, who wanted to see their star play. He didn't face any repercussions for this, however, and returned to play professional football once the competition was over. Finally, in 2013, it was revealed that an Orlando-based pharmaceutical company had been supplying several Major League Baseball franchises with various PEDs. The MLB then suspended 14 players, some for life, and struck a deal with the American government that they would not be legally prosecuted for this if they cracked down on all forms of steroid testing. This proved to be effective, as the MLB is yet to have another controversy since. Lofty El-Bousidi is a former player for Mainz FC in the Bundesliga 2 and now a scholar and anti-drug advocate. After his playing days were over, he went to university in Munich, where he released his now famous thesis on PEDs and their use in the footballing world. During his own career, he testified that whilst playing at an undisclosed club, team doctors would give him various injections. "They gave me a boost like nothing I'd ever felt before," he went on to admit. In his thesis, he conducted an anonymous survey from player contacts he had gained in his career in Sweden, Germany and Spain. He asked questions both about the drug use and drug testing among teams, and the results were that he could confidently say between 14 and 30% of players had doped in the previous year. 43% had not been tested in the previous year, and 50% on top of that had only one test in the previous year. He concluded that if there were a drug problem at football's top level, the players in question were most likely getting away with it. Because of these many examples, there exist several governing bodies whose main goal is to stop doping on all levels, and these exist on both national and international levels. The most prominent of which is the WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency, which was founded in 1999 due to increasing cases of doping in several leagues across the sporting world. However, the general consensus is that this organisation has failed to stop doping at many levels at all throughout its existence, so therefore, what else is being done? Well, very little, as it turns out, as taking down systemic cheating within entire nations may prove extremely difficult. Since the huge doping scandal in 2019, Russia and Russian athletes have been forced to compete under a neutral flag until 2024, following the unveiling of a nationwide doping scandal. This was released because whilst fleeing from Russia in fears for his safety, Olympic team doctor Grigory Rodchenkov handed over documents to the US that all but confirmed the 2012-2013 Russian football squad had been using banned substances. This was ignored at best by all Russia's anti-doping agency attempts, and at worst it was being encouraged, but there is little reason to believe that this is a Russian-only problem, as he also claimed other nations' anti-doping agencies may be corrupted as well. These countries being Thailand, Turkey, Greece, China, Russia, Brazil, South Africa, and Romania. The general understanding some hold that doping is done by players looking to get an advantage does not tell the whole story. The problems we have now can pretty much entirely be attributed to the corruption and lack of professionalism of domestic anti-doping authorities, and the bigger failure of the World Anti-Doping Authority to go after and ensure its rules are being followed. However, not enough is being done by individual players to chase up these authorities, and perhaps the existence of a new committee would be a good idea. The fight against doping in sport is going to be a difficult one, when not only players but potentially entire countries have issues with drugs going unpunished, and the agencies made to prevent it don't seem to be interested in enforcing the very rules they created. Therefore, it isn't unrealistic to expect this fight to continue for quite some time. The main references used in this presentation were Mottram, Drugs in Sport, Malcolm P., No Systematic Doping in Football, a Critical Review, and Duval, the Russian doping scandal at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Thank you very much for watching.